Well, welcome everyone. Hello. It's so good to have you here at South by Southwest. We're excited for today's session on the social isolation interrupters. I'm Megan Trace, Director of Social Innovation at United Way Worldwide. For those who may not know, United Way mobilizes the caring power of the community to advance the common good. We serve 95% of communities across the United States, and we're in 40 countries and territories around the world. In the work that we do, we are always seeking to advance innovations that build community resiliency and equitable communities. Before we get started today, I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Energizing Health and the Barnes Family Foundation for their support today. So here we are. What a year it's been. I think it was actually around this time last year when they made the announcement to cancel South by that it really hit home about how serious the pandemic was going to be, that events of this magnitude and importance weren't going to happen in 2020. So it's so good to be reunited here, even virtually. But since the start of the pandemic, we've all been hit with a new reality, one that's altered our daily routines, and it's kept us from each other. Unfortunately, the social distancing restrictions in COVID-19 have contributed to another epidemic, that of loneliness. And I think many of us have experienced this to varying degrees during the pandemic, but the reality is that this was a problem before the pandemic, and many will continue to experience this even as the world reopens. So that means that solutions to solve this issue, to address this issue, must continue beyond COVID. And that's why we're so happy for today's session. We are fortunate to be joined by researchers, scholars, practitioners, and we're going to talk and learn more about this critical issue. We're also going to have a panel to discuss those solutions. So please chat your Q&A as we go. We are going to collect all those. We'll bring them to the experts. And then we're going to go ahead and get started. So kicking things off, I'd like to welcome Stephen Michael Crane, a research scientist from Stanford. Go Cardinal. Michael, thank you for being here. As we get started, could you just share a little bit about your role at Stanford and your background?
Yeah, sure thing. I've actually been here in the Bay Area and at Stanford since 2007, and I did my undergrad and then my master's in community health and prevention research at Stanford, which finished a couple years ago. And now I'm a research scholar on a big interdisciplinary project studying human nature and human flourishing in the biotechnological future. And I also do behavior design and research as a freelance consultant. And that's how I've done more work in this space of social connectedness, which follows on from my thesis research.
Well, wonderful. We're so fortunate to have you. Could we just get started? And I'd love to hear, how would you define social isolation?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, just by way of intro, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you. And it's such an important topic. From my study of human nature, it's clear that our sociality is one of our species' defining features and defining strengths. And I like to say when our social ties, they form a lattice that support our growth and our health and our longevity. And when they're frayed, it's really important to pay attention. And like you said, there have been issues before the pandemic and issues exacerbated by the pandemic, and we'll put some numbers on that as we go along. But as far as defining social isolation, so in this space, we think of social isolation more of an objective measure of more about quantity of relationships, of contacts, how long you see people. But an important term that goes along with it is loneliness, and separating those out can be important because loneliness points to the felt sense, the subjective feeling of isolation. And that's actually pretty important because a lot of the impacts that come out of loneliness, social isolation, happen because of stress and because of that felt sense of isolation. So the definition of loneliness is feeling a difference between your desired and your perceived relationship quality. So when you don't have the relationships that you want.
So folks are experiencing different degrees of this. and the subjective element of loneliness is
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
we've probably all felt at different points in time.
Yeah.
So are there ways to really quantify and measure loneliness?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different measures that are used. There's different scales and instruments. There's ones that are geared more in the positive direction of a social connectedness scale, where, you know, higher scores is more connectedness. There are related areas and constructs like social support, which can take lots of different forms. And the big one in this area for measuring loneliness is usually the UCLA loneliness scale. And you can do an 11-item version or a 20-item version, but that's one that's used across a lot of different research and national surveys. So you'll often see that that is the measure of loneliness. And it asks people, you know, really about that felt sense of lacking companionship, feeling left out, feeling isolated, feeling like you have people to talk to or you're close to. So that's the measure that you see most often. And when you look at that measure across national demographics, there's a lot of different, you know, sort of point estimates of how prevalent loneliness is. But generally, about 30 to 50% of people are lonely some of the time or all of the time. And loneliness tends to be highest in young adults. And a pretty shocking and large figure that points to what people, you know, generally call the loneliness epidemic is that about 20% of people rarely or never feel that there's anybody they can talk to. So, you know, 1 in 5 in the United States is quite a lot there.
Wow. Are there other segments that are disproportionately impacted by loneliness?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of surprising. To some people, if you're not familiar with this space, generally we tend to think of older people as being the loneliest. But in my research and in a lot of other people's research, actually, sort of after age 50 or so, people's loneliness tends to go down. Their social connectedness tends to go up, their felt sense of connection. And it's only after age 75 where health issues become a major concern or loss of a spouse sometimes happens. That's where people tend to get lonelier at that sort of older age. But it's actually the youngest people who are often the loneliest, sort of late teens, early adulthood. There's actually a large BBC study that studied loneliness across the entire globe. And they really tried to study lots of different cultures and nationalities and perspectives and incomes. And it was young white men in individualistic cultures that tend to be the loneliest. Yeah.
Wow. That makes me think of a lot of the challenges that our country is facing, really, with current societal issues. So
exactly. Yeah, connection is.
You mentioned health risks. Can you share a little bit more about the health risks associated with social isolation and loneliness?
Sure. So loneliness, of course, feels bad. And so there's that subjective impact on our general well-being. But besides making us unhappy, chronic loneliness actually has a lot of major health impacts. And these are also pretty shocking numbers. So it increases the risk of an earlier death by about 20%. And it's also associated in what's generally thought to be a causal way with many other chronic diseases, hypertension, diabetes, stress. And, you know, a commonly cited stat in this area is that the health impacts of loneliness are akin to smoking nearly a pack of cigarettes per day on general health. So it's a huge health issue, but it's generally not treated that way in the medical system. You know, we don't have big randomized controlled trials of the best interventions to help with loneliness. We often don't screen for it in a medical setting. And as far as the financial impact of that, just on the federal level alone, there's an estimated $6.7 billion spent just on issues from social disconnection. And that's just federal spending itself. And why this might happen, it's interesting. There's some new research on the neuroscience of loneliness. Loneliness actually hurts. It's a drive that's like hunger or thirst, and it shares some common brain regions with hunger and thirst that are related to motivation and craving. So that signal, loneliness, is actually important. It's important to listen to that signal and to treat it with the same priority that we put into other health factors. So just like we encourage everybody to eat well and sleep well and exercise well, it's really worth the effort to connect well as too. I think that pays dividends back to society and back to individuals when we do that.
Wow. A pack of cigarettes a day equivalent. That's a jarring way to put the cost of
technically
this,
15 cigarettes a day, which is close to a pack.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the pandemic and what have we seen in terms of the trends and the effects of the toll this is taking on folks.
Right. So I wanted to look into this too. So prepping for this panel, I've been looking at all the latest research that's come out about the pandemic. And in general, it's kind of a mixed bag. Certain populations hit harder than others. But it's also kind of a surprise that most studies that have looked at this in the highest quality way across the entire previous year in the biggest picture are not finding changes in loneliness. And for some people, they've even had improvements in social connectedness. So the major impacts really have been in other domains of well-being, like stress and depression, and anxiety. Those are much worse than they were before the pandemic. And the impacts are much worse than they have been on loneliness. And of course, there's huge inequities in the impacts of those other conditions and the general health impact of the pandemic. But for certain populations, social connection has not actually suffered that much, despite the fact that most things have gone virtual. People who are more introverted have found that the world has sort of shifted and adjusted closer to their pace and preference for social connection. And hopefully, I've experienced this, and hopefully many people who crave social connection have benefited perhaps from the pause and found some benefit in solitude. Solitude and loneliness are not necessarily the same thing. You can be alone, but not be lonely. Another study that just came out showed that as far as household composition, who you lived with, it was only the people who lived with a partner who were more likely to improve in social connection after the social distancing guidelines were put in place than those with any other arrangement in their household. And on average, romantic relationships have not actually deteriorated over the course of the pandemic. People are relatively more willing to forgive their partners during COVID-19.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah. And like I mentioned, actually older people on the whole have done well. So I'll split that. Older individuals in nursing homes obviously have been hit the hardest, really a double whammy of the health impacts of COVID, the mortality, and social isolation, because those were the populations that were, most disconnected from their usual social connection systems. But community dwelling adults, not in nursing homes, are actually doing pretty well. And I think it's because they've been practicing these skills of prioritizing social connection even before the pandemic. And some research from one of my former advisors at Stanford, Laura Carstensen, shows that as people get older, the number of connections that they have goes down. There's fewer people, but they invest more in those relationships and they make them more emotionally satisfying. So because they do that, their general sense of loneliness and social connection is improved relative to younger populations. So the early adulthood, middle adulthood, none of them are generally as socially connected as the 50+ crowd.
Wow, these are some unexpected trends.
Yeah, it's surprising, isn't it?
Just to follow up on pandemic effects, and given the research you cited that youth, especially young men, are more subject to loneliness, I'm thinking about schools going remote and particularly the effect on teenagers and youth who may not have that social contact. And so I'm just wondering whether your research, you're finding things, or how that I'm sure that's going to be studied for quite some time, the effect of this year.
Yeah, and that is a population I probably should have mentioned, is school-age children have really lost a lot, as far as trying to do homeschooling and, even little young kids trying to do kindergarten by Zoom, it's really not the same. But it's also, it's sort of a mixed bag for teenagers. On the one hand, their social connection is extremely important, their ability to socialize, to come together, to do things that they, normally would do. On the other hand, they are very good at digital connection. This was already
Right.
part of their lives pre-pandemic and continued to be.
Mhm.
And when you look at the research on that on social media use is not necessarily correlated with loneliness. So people who use it a lot and people who use it not at all generally have the same amount of loneliness. But what is shown in that area, at least in some findings, is that people who use social media to engage with other people, actually writing messages, writing comments, reaching out to people, making connections, can really benefit from it. People who are just sort of scrolling and passively consuming what's there generally do not, are made to feel more socially disconnected.
Mhm.
And I think that goes back to that definition of loneliness, feeling like your desired relationship quality isn't meeting your perceived relationship quality. And I
Mhm.
think, seeing that highlight reel of everybody else's like nice
Right.
times and happy pictures makes you feel like your ideal is maybe higher than it realistically needs to be relative to, reality of day-to-day life.
Well, I want to take an audience question that I just see come in because I think it's really relevant in terms of thinking about segments impacted. Abigail asks, are there any known racial or ethnic socioeconomic disparities in the prevalence or impact of loneliness and social isolation?
Yes, there are some. In general, I haven't researched this closely lately, but I'm remembering some of the things I read. I think by race, there's not really huge differences in loneliness. There is by income and employment. So and housing. So housing is important, employment is important, and income are all predictors of less loneliness. Basically, if you're housed, you have a good job, and you have income, you tend to be less lonely than people who are the opposite on all three of those dimensions.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for sharing, Mike. We really, really appreciate your time.
Yeah,
This was
of
a
course.
fascinating conversation, and you'll be available for Q&A after, but we're going to transition to our panel now.
Yeah, I'm excited to see about the solutions. And, just to close really quick, I do think we're at a special moment in history. We get to decide what lessons we carry forward, and we're reinventing so much about our lives. So I'm glad we're having this conversation because this is a time of immense possibility. So thank you.
Yes. All right. Thanks. So we'll bring up our panel now. We're thrilled to be joined today by a stellar group who are going to share about innovative solutions to combat some of these challenges that Michael shared about related to loneliness and social isolation. So each panelist is going to briefly introduce themselves and their social isolation innovation. And then we're going to go into some discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Makiel Salmons, the Executive Director of United Way, the Netherlands. Take it away. You can unmute.
I'm not on mute anymore. Can
there
you
we
hear
go.
Me? Yeah, okay. Well, the thing is, I'm very, very thrilled to be here at this panel. I can tell you it's almost impossible to say something about our work in 3 minutes, but I will try to do that anyway. In the Netherlands, 155,000 elderly are known to be isolated. And indeed, as Stephen said in his introduction, this is a phenomenon that occurred even before the pandemic struck. Here in the Netherlands, the government introduced measures to keep elderly away from relatives, from friends. In fact, creating a very, very dreadful situation for them. So we figured we have to do something about this. And we held talks with a variety of stakeholders, and this also explains how we reach them. We talked to social workers, municipal council organizations, NGOs, operational at the grassroots level, in order to, first of all, identify these elderly who are isolated, and secondly, to find a way to get them out of isolation. And I think we found a brilliant solution. We partnered with an organization called Help Digital, as they call it, and they collect old tablets or new tablets, and they refurbish it. They completely erase everything that's on it and make a very user-friendly tool so that the elderly can use it. Then the elderly receive training by staff in the elderly home, for instance, on the usage. Really, it's not a requirement, the training, because it's a question of pressing the red or the green button. But of course, the need was identified to mix them, to introduce them to partners. And we figured another marginalized group seriously hit by the corona crisis are refugees in the Netherlands. They became, for the second time, victims, first in their country of origin, and now, due to the high unemployment rates that have been caused by the corona crisis, they became, kind of desperate and depressed. So what we did, we offered them language training in exchange for participating for 1 year as volunteer. And initially they were a little bit reluctant to do that, but when we explained to them that in the Dutch culture that can actually boost your credibility and your CV when you do volunteer work, they not only got excited, but when they were first matched with the elderly, it turned out to be a wonderful experience because the elderly regained their sense of belonging. They were able to help the refugees practice the Dutch language, but also offer cultural orientation courses. But on the other hand, the refugees at regular intervals, every Thursday at 4 p.m., would call in. And the relationship is so close now, unexpected spin-off in other cultures where the refugees come from, for instance, relationship and respect for the elderly is far more significant than in the Netherlands. So you had this beautiful relationship established that no doubt will continue until even after the corona pandemic, and they can help them with all kinds of community work. So that's 3 minutes, I stop here.
Yes, thank you. And I love your passion and enthusiasm. We'll turn it over to Sarah Link, Director of No Wrong Door, Virginia.
Hi, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be with you this morning. So my name is Sarah Link, and I'm the Director of No Wrong Door, Virginia at the Virginia Department for Rehabilitation Services. And I oversee the statewide No Wrong Door initiative, which is a federal program under the Administration for Community Living, which partners with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, as well as the Veterans Health Administration. And No Wrong Door exists in all 56 states and territories at various capacities. As a part of the federal vision for No Wrong Door, we work to streamline access to long-term services and supports by providing a single point of entry system. So in Virginia, we do this by leveraging existing networks of organizations that include 25 area agencies on aging that are really our No Wrong Door lead partner organizations. And these organizations partner with local community organizations that include home and community-based services that range from Meals on Wheels to adult services, and by also including our network of Centers for Independent Living and local Department of Social Services. So by connecting all of these bricks and mortar organizations through a common and secure technology platform, we offer bi-directional referrals that an individual does not have to tell their unique story and circumstances multiple times. So No Wrong Door also adheres to person-centered thinking and person-centered practices by delivering person-centered options counseling through a trained network of professionals statewide, and for having a very unique eye and lens on knowing that people who often come to our metaphorical door often are seeking multiple supports at one point in time. And this is usually seeking supports because there's some type of disruptive life event, some type of major life transition, which includes a fall or the loss of a loved one. So in these instances of these disruptive life events, we know people are experiencing trauma and the ill effects often of social isolation. And it's really at these critical points we recognize how important it is to get people to the tools, resources, and supports that they need, which is why it is so exciting to now be a joint winner alongside United Way Worldwide, woohoo, and the Administration for Communities Living's Mental Health Innovation Challenge. And this is really exciting for us because it is really leveraging a network of partners in creating a national clearinghouse of resources to support individuals by offering, in this case, a self-reflective assessment for understanding ourselves, understanding our situation, and even understanding our level of risk. So what's important with these types of assessments and tools is that we're not labeling an individual, but rather we're helping many people in understanding where they are in their life's journey and for getting those supports that they need when they need them. And this work is all a part of the National Commit to Connect effort, and we are really thrilled to be at the table with United Way Worldwide. Thank you.
Well, wonderful. We're so thrilled to partner with you, and I'm going to pass it right to my colleague, Matt Alloberti from United Way Worldwide, to share more about himself and this collaboration.
Thanks, Megan. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Makio and Stephen, for that great overview, and thank you all. So I am at United Way Worldwide. I've been here for about 6 years, and I've had a bunch of different roles, and I sort of connect a lot of great work that United Way and our partners do. And the innovation that I'm going to be talking about today has been around for a while and has been finding new uses during the pandemic. 211 is a referral hotline founded years ago in one community and is now a 3-digit hotline that serves over 95% of the US. A real quick summary: 211 specialists track pretty much all the nonprofit services, government supports, and programs in their community, maintain it in a database that they regularly update, so they know where to go to get help. And they staff a 24/7 hotline and texting and other ways to get through to them to provide referrals and connections to help. So they track over 900,000 records of supports in aggregate. We help about 15 million people annually, and that's spiked during COVID. And COVID is sort of indicative of how people seek help. Needs changed over time, from just what's this coronavirus to how do I get food, how do I get unemployment benefits. And we learned how to dig deeper into the needs people might have. If someone's calling for unemployment benefits, well, that might mean their income went down, and they might now also want to hear about food programs in their community. So we're bringing this great resource that's already in place in almost every community to this partnership that Sarah mentioned, this clearinghouse, to provide a range of resources to people who are socially isolated, and making sure that we're providing screenings and assessments to address very specific and deep needs related to loneliness and isolation, but also meeting their range of interests, stresses, needs, to help the whole person. So calling a hotline may not seem like an innovation, but having a national network of up-to-date local information that's trained to help people will help us make any innovations going forward more useful for the people that we're trying to work with. So I can provide more later on, but I don't want to take up more time.
Thanks, Matt. Finally, we'll turn it over to Amy Vest, President of Behavior Design Media.
Hello, I'm Amy Vest, and thank you all for joining us today. And I'm really honored to be working on this important problem and to be with these panelists. And I'd like you all to take just a minute as a way of introducing our product that we're developing, and think about, when was the last time that you delivered a really meaningful thank you to someone? Or when was the last time that you invested your energy in just checking on someone to see if they're okay? And if it was really recent, you're welcome to put it in the chat. If it was really recent, think about what prompted you to do that. Because a lot of times there are these behaviors that we know help to knit, as Stephen was talking about, that lattice of connection and support together and help us feel like we're well supported. And the pandemic has certainly disrupted the way we connect with people and the way we reach out to them and what prompts us to do it. Because maybe in the past, you were able to see their body language more and more frequently, or maybe at the water cooler, and if someone else told you, oh, did you hear what's happening with such and such person? We need to just keep checking on them, make sure they're okay. So it's very different now. And as we were in this time uniquely, even though this app or digital program was already in place and being researched, when the pandemic hit, it caused us to rethink what is it that prompts us to do these behaviors. And as a behavior designer and as someone who also works with Stephen Michael Crane, who was our main presenter. Stephen worked on what is a big grid? What are the behaviors that a person can do that has quantitative and qualitative data supporting it, that if people were to do these all the time, it would have a measurable impact on their positive engagement and their sense of connection to others. And so we also thought about what is it that prompts us to do those behaviors? So, because a lot of us have behaviors in our lives that we know we should do, like exercise and drink more water. And for a lot of us, the reason we don't do it is because either nothing prompts us to do it, we don't have that habit small enough that it's achievable for everybody, or because we just don't have a place that it naturally fits into our day, so it doesn't happen every day. So what we're wanting to do is take those 200 behaviors, start with some of the very easiest ones, find a way to prompt those in a super friendly environment so that anybody could do it, and help people feel successful when they do, and help it feel meaningful to them. Also offering them smaller ways they can make it more meaningful, make it more regular, and give them a sense of success when they complete it. So we've started running some small tests. We've gotten super interesting responses from the tests. Some people saying, I never would have had the confidence to reach out because I would have thought a certain percentage of people that I felt like connecting with or checking on or thanking would have felt like, why is she doing that? And she said, I have found that, 100% of the time, people like it. So, so it's been really great to see the affirmation and response of people. One of the behaviors is reconnecting with people from the past, and seeing people say, it's been 20 years since I've connected with this person, and renewing that friendship just feels really good. So, so it's kind of, we're still trying to figure out a lot of the logistics, but if you think about what Calm and Headspace do for a person's internal world, we would like to do that for their external social lattice. Because think if everybody was doing the behaviors of meaningful thank yous, of checking on each other, and of, really expressing appreciation to each other, what a stronger and more connected community we could create together.
Love that. And I love thinking about it in the way of what Calm has done and how this experience could really change the game. So let's dig right into some questions. I'll start with Machiel. Just question really, how do you reach the people you serve who are socially isolated?
Yeah, that's a big challenge because of course they don't use the social media that often. But what we do is we try to get to the, we work with the municipal council who have over 600 outposts in a variety of towns and cities. And then we go to the grassroots workers, the social workers, and we ask them when they visit the elderly to provide information of our project. And that is then used to build a list of participants who are potentially interested. And frankly speaking, unlike what you would believe, there is a significant interest because the social workers are telling the elderly that it's really user-friendly, that they don't have to have a degree in computer sciences in order to operate it. And that it also opens the world, and they get a free course in the use of and access to the internet. So right now we have 1,600 applicants, but due to limited resources, we can only cater for 70 elderly at this point in time.
Wow, so huge demand.
Yeah.
We need to work to find every resource to get your way
Absolutely.
to serve more. Sarah, would you add anything about how you reach the people you serve who are socially isolated?
Yeah, great. We as mentioned, it's really tough, but we use a multifaceted approach to reaching by first raising awareness within our networks of area agencies on aging, CILs, Centers for Independent Living, and the broad swath of home and community-based partners that we work with. And we also do this through technology, and we have our new Easy Access Virginia website, and we're calling this our Person Center portal. So it offers a person a unique lens of thinking about their life through the lens and context of social determinants of health, all of those things that make up quality of life. And in this online tools, we also offer curated resources that help individuals connect. It also offers really exciting search functionality for looking for providers. And we use a statewide resource database of 227,000 plus resources, and that's fueled by Virginia Navigator. So anybody can go online and search for any type of supports that they're looking. And we also use, as Matt had mentioned, we also use 211 Virginia. They have a 24/7 live chat function on our website. And there's 2 lanes for a 24/7 live chat of both English and Spanish. And we're very excited about that. So anybody who's a little bit more tech savvy can use it. And we also offer a lower tech functionality too, of just a toll-free number, also operated by a trained specialist on 211 that understands our No Wrong Door network. So through those approaches, we're really able to help meet and understand some of the unique needs that individuals have. And then, one of the other ways that we have too is that we also have search functionality on our website for anybody looking for socialization. And these types of assessments and tools that we have on our website also are supported by Virginia Assistive Technology. And Virginia Assistive Technology offers a free consultation to anybody. You can go in on our website and ask this, and they will provide a free consultation in some types of tools, whether it's an Alexa or a robotic pet or any of those types of other tech tools that are offered, as well as even just like a weighted blanket, something to help kind of reduce anxiety. So those are some of the things that we offer. And again, kind of reaching out to our network and getting awareness out there is really a big push that we try to use.
Thanks, Sarah. Amy, you kind of gave us a teaser on, I think, this exciting body of work and development of new technology. So I'm wondering, could you just share a little bit more about how the solution is really a game changer in addressing loneliness?
Yes, so it's a game changer in the tech world because most of the behaviors that an app wants the person to do are things that increase screen time, increase your time on the app, and increase your time spent with that digital intervention or digital tool. What ours does is, and it's felt a little tricky at first, is can we use technology to prompt real world behaviors? And then we don't want them to just come back to the app to just journal or just mark it off simply like a checklist. We want the app or the digital environment, digital community to be supportive of that. But what we found is so far is that when people are doing these actions, they kind of have the natural celebration out in the real world. So I think that's really wonderful. And no other or few other digital products would have that because everyone, to repeat a behavior, there needs to be some sort of reinforcement, and emotions are what create habits. And so we're prompting things that increase the quality of their emotional engagement. So it has its own reward, but our digital environment is also going to celebrate that with them. And in terms of a game changer when in the loneliness arena, separate from digital products, I do think that a lot of things in our lives don't happen because a prompt doesn't happen. Nothing tells us, do this behavior right now. And so I thought, it was like, what if we just stripped everything away? Because we've got lots and lots of ideas and lots of ways to expand the product. But what happens if we just strip it down to the prompt? Will people do it, and will they like it? And so far, it seems like, yes, they do. So we're excited to explore, and we feel like that gives us a good place to start from as well. And yes, there are about 200 behaviors. Thank you, Stephen and Michael Green, for all your research on what those are and how we might configure those in and grow them and help people increase in quantity and quality of those types of interactions.
Wonderful, thank you. Matt, want to toss a question your way about how COVID-19 has changed the way that your work, has changed the way we're delivering services.
Yeah, and by and large, United Way and 2-in-1s don't provide direct services, but it really revealed how service delivery and in-person help changed dramatically. So a year ago, as you mentioned, Megan, at the beginning, like things were shutting down, and we know about schools and restaurants and museums. Pretty much every nonprofit closed their offices a year ago also, and that affected people who, you know, were getting counseling and used organizations for activities, meals, rides, job trainings, that all closed. And some organizations eventually transitioned to virtual, others stayed closed. And all that affected the web of supports that people were getting. And yes, there are tremendous online, digital, tech-based solutions, but there's also stresses that are resolved through in-person connections and local programs. 2-in-1, these numbers aren't super precise, but the magnitude is that an average call went from 2 to 3 minutes to hear a need and give a referral to 20 to 30 minutes during the pandemic, because everything was closed and specialists needed to keep updating their awareness of what was open, what the eligibility was, what the PPE or protections were, and how people's needs kept evolving as this virus changed. So if it was that hard for trained social work, often social workers, specialists, like how do people reduce their distance and perceived distance to the supports and connections that they want? So this is all informing the work that we're doing with Sarah and other partners about how do we make sure that yes, there are great connections to online and digital and innovations that way, but also we're thinking of local solutions and connections that people may already be accessing and build them to meet people where they are.
Thanks, Matt. Machiel, how do you ensure that your offering is inclusive and that it's really generating those long-lasting connections versus kind of the one-offs?
Well, the fact that they are refugees, you couldn't have a better example because they are the minority in the Netherlands. And with regards to the duration and sustainability of the project, well, based on our initial assessment, we've come to the conclusion that the personal relationship that have been built between the elderly and the refugee, it's not a mechanical one, it's a spontaneous one, it's an emotional one, it's a sensitive one. And that is the best guarantee for what I would call a sustained friendship, because these people help each other. It's mutually reinforcing their happiness. Can you imagine? We sat into one of the sessions in order to get an idea, with, of course, the permission of the two of them. And well, one of the elderly persons used to be a school teacher and hadn't been visited by relatives or friends for over a year. And all of a sudden, you know, felt empowered to train these refugees and improve their language skills and offer cultural orientation. On the other hand, the refugee you know, felt so sorry about the plight of the elderly that they offered actually to do shopping for them, grocery shopping, etc., etc. And they said, listen, if this pandemic is ever over, we would like to invite you to our place and offer you a traditional Eritrean meal and cook for them. So this is what I mean. It's inclusive by virtue of the fact that we're dealing with refugees, and it also has a sustainable impact. I have to, one word of caution, obviously not all elderly people are interested, keen and open to work with minorities or with refugees. So they are carefully selected for that purpose at this initial stage. But as word gets around that this is an exciting project, you'll see more and more, let's say, hesitant elderly sign up for this project.
Thanks, Machiel. So we talked a lot about tech solutions, but I wanted to think on the flip side, for those that may not have access to tech infrastructure or may be a little less comfortable using it. What kind of low-tech options do we have to connect people when technology is not readily available? Matt and Sarah and Matt.
Yeah, so we really leverage all of our great work through our 25 area agencies on aging across the state. And they've, in addition to our Centers for Independent Living, have come up with some really creative solutions that are low tech. And in fact, we've actually compiled a series of best practices that's available on our website, and happy to share that afterwards. And some of them include car parades, just friendly visitor check-ins, and really what's most widely successful, again, is those Meals on Wheels type programs where somebody's just doing a check-in. And there's even some really basic things like even having like a lawn parade where people have come out and been socially distanced. We had one area agencies on aging do like a 60s party. But, keeping in mind the fact that people, who are, contending with this pandemic still need that personal touch, even if it's at a distance. So we, that physical distancing that we're experiencing should not also be a social distance. So that's really important to keep in mind. So we've also seen in our work that 300% rise in the need for telephone reassurance through our network. So people are really craving speaking to a live person. So I think that's really, really unique and interesting. And, to Matt's and it's United Way Worldwide's work with a 211 system, we've seen that number rise too, even within Virginia. So really important to, again, have those like warm lines, those touch points where people can communicate with a live person.
Yeah, and I always, I present a lot with Sarah now, and I always go after her, and she always answers everything I was going to say in a better way. I've spoken a lot about 211, and we're also thinking through, United Way's 3 pillars are give, advocate, volunteer, and the volunteer aspect is really resonating with the tool we're building and the approach we're bringing to this issue, because not everybody needs to be helped by institutions. We just we want to provide connections and opportunities to get out and connect and embrace people's interests, not label people, as Sarah said earlier. So tech connections are great, but also facilitating ways to get out and engage in the community is also something that really resonates with us. And I'm seeing some great suggestions in the chat and hope to be able to follow up with folks.
Yeah, thanks, Matt and Sarah. And thank you to everyone who is chiming in the chat with links, ideas, suggestions. It's a broad learning community. I think we all want to learn from each other. So happy to start some audience questions. We've had some come in, and we're going to bring Stephen back on, make sure we can tap his expertise for this section. And so I think we actually have some questions really around behaviors. And so for Amy and Stephen, one question came in around what are the top behaviors that have the biggest impact in loneliness reduction and enriching social connections?
Yeah, sure, I can start on that. That's a great question. As far as what's really been studied, it really depends on who the people are. Most of the loneliness interventions or behaviors that have been studied are for specific populations, like, a cancer support group or something like that. So I think we actually need broad scale study of what types of interventions. But as far as the things that we've been working on, that Amy and I have been working on, I think those behaviors that have the biggest impact are probably going to be ones that are easy enough for people to do that they actually do them. So it may be very effective to, do some huge behavior of, writing a long letter and going and reading it to someone of how much you appreciate them, but that's a big lift. So I would say it's better to do something smaller, like the behaviors that we've profiled on just making little forays, little bids to connect with other people, offer them gratitude, surprise them. I think starting with those will have the biggest impact because they're something that basically everybody can do.
Another question kind of on this behavior change aspect is, what advice do you have to help people relearn and replace routines with new routines or with friends that have been disrupted due to COVID-19?
Well, there is a book called Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg that is super helpful. And both Stephen and I have worked with BJ Fogg for a number of years. And he is also from Stanford and runs the behavior design lab there. So that'd be a great book on that. But the super quick answer is when you want to change your routine is finding the smallest piece of that routine that you can slot into a predictable time. So looking at what is it that you do every day? Let's say you get up and take a medication every morning. Is there something you could slot in right there? After I take my medication, I will do blank. And then I will help myself have a strong emotion right after that, or a positive emotion. Like after I take my medicine, I will think of one thing I'm grateful for. I will speak it out loud, and I will say, you know, good job, Amy, in fostering your own mental health and well-being. So finding places to insert the new behaviors that you want, and then making it small enough that you actually can do it, and helping yourself feel good when you do it helps cement that into a routine so that you can do it repeatedly.
I think those are super helpful, actionable steps. And I think a lot of us will probably be ordering Tiny Habits or listening to it on Audible soon. Thanks for those tips. We got a question that came in on kind of technology and how, so this individual says, I deal with seniors and technology is a tough learn, especially when we didn't have time to prepare for the pandemic. Macchiello had mentioned, you know, we try to make it simple for folks who don't have degrees in computer science. So could you share a little bit more about how you've done that?
Yeah, so literally, our partner received tablets filled with all kinds of apps and erased everything and only downloaded the WhatsApp app. And there was a SIM card for those who didn't have Wi-Fi, because of course, those elderly who don't live in elderly homes, but live, you know, in communities, they don't have Wi-Fi, for instance. So they can use the SIM card to communicate. And well, once, it sounds very simplistic, but once they started using the tablet and communicating and saw their picture and also the picture of the refugee, they asked very simple, basic questions like, can we also use it? I have an uncle who lives in Indonesia. Can I use it for that purpose? So when we said, for sure, you know, slowly we opened the world of the internet, and some of them started to expand. They said, well, we want to know something more about Facebook. Can you explain? And this is the beauty. That's exactly what the refugee did. They gradually took these guys by the hand and explained the basic social media skills. Now, I'm not saying that they're now actively using the internet, but I can tell you the steps that have been taken are remarkable. All you need to do is be very patient and generate curiosity. And that's exactly what's happening. And that also builds in a sense of enthusiasm, you know, because they learned something that somehow or another was abstract and mystic.
Love that. Have curiosity, be patient. Sounds like strip it down to the basics, and how organically,
yeah,
through that friendship,
yeah,
there was more interest in maybe learning a little bit more about tech. So wow, what a cool program. We did get a question that came in around how can you identify a group or a person who's experiencing loneliness without overstepping boundaries? Kind of the sensitivity, awareness of it, but also that drive to help. Is there anyone who wants to jump in? Thanks, Amy.
Yeah. So we looked into several products that we might build and found that actually nobody wanted to be the lonely person where everybody would channel the resources to that lonely person. And in almost every case, for example, Facebook, Nextdoor, there were about 95% more people willing to help than to be helped. And so it created almost an inventory problem if you're looking at it as a checklist. But I would say if you think a person is experiencing loneliness and you want to help that person, how might you engage them in being the solution for other people's loneliness rather than trying to get them to focus on their own problem? Because it's not going to be the one helped It's not wanting to be the one with the problem. And frankly, a lot of people who actually do engage in these really pro-social, really helpful, that is the way they deal with their own loneliness. And it gives them an outlet and a channel to do so. That's a positive opportunity. So that is what I would suggest, is seeing if you can collaborate with them and get them to help others, or to share stories, or to connect in some way that they feel is helpful, that's maybe not intended for them to be just a recipient.
Thank you, Amy. So our time has just flown by. I think this conversation has been super fascinating. So I want to just do one quick round robin as we close out. I'm going to ask all of our experts today, to share in about 30 seconds or so, what's that one tip for practitioners that you would say could make them more effective in addressing social isolation and loneliness? We'll start with Makiel.
Could you repeat? Sorry, I wasn't concentrating. Could you repeat that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, just as we wrap today's session, what's that one tip that you have for practitioners in this space who are looking to increase their effectiveness in addressing social isolation and loneliness?
Yes. All right. So I'm a little bit older than the people in my team. My team comprises many who are in their 20s. And I have the tendency as an older person to say, the social media, forget about it. I'm too old. I'm not going to learn it. I'm going to leave it to the young generation. Still, the young generation is bringing to my attention the fact that if you don't pay attention to digital marketing, you'll never have a position of United Way in the Netherlands, because that's the new trend. That's how you communicate, and that's why you have to learn. So by actually referring it back to me as my responsibility in order to do a proper job, I can sense that it's working, because I'm now starting to learn more about the social media and apply it. Now, the same thing applies to those people who are 75, 80 years old. They have the tendency to say, okay, this is the new generation. It's far too complicated. I don't want to know about it. However, if you somehow or another manage to trigger this curiosity that I referred to earlier by saying, hey, you don't have to go outside to talk to your granddaughter. You don't have to be in the same room in order to hear her play the violin or to watch together a movie. Simply by pressing that button, you'd be surprised how much interest this is generating and how much people would actually love it. But as I said before, be patient and work a little bit, apply a little bit psychology to it.
Thank you. Sarah, we'll jump to you. What's your one insider tip?
I think we could start with ourselves. And I think that's a really good tip for us to even think like applying more social connections outwardly. So for example, even when you're going through a Starbucks drive-through and they're asking you, how are you doing? Just opening up a gateway for a conversation with somebody, asking them, how are you doing? Really creates a platform and a mechanism to have a dialogue and to really feel how somebody's doing.
Love that.
Yeah.
Matt, what about you? One insight and tip.
Yeah, I think look beyond immediate fixes and what else may be inspiring or interesting to a person. I've been thinking a lot more about art throughout the whole pandemic rather than just work. And I think that will help draw out more people than just more offers of help, to sort of to Amy's point, rather than meeting people with what inspires them.
Love it. Amy.
Yes, I would say look for what is the easiest thing for people to do, and then help them feel successful doing it. And try that first, and then see what is it that tells the person to do this now, and how might you either make that easier or more emotionally satisfying and fulfilling.
Thank you. And Stephen.
Yeah, Amy took mine, unsurprisingly, but I would
on the same wavelength.
I would similarly say, help people, one of BJ's maxims, help people do what they already want to do. So you can find something that points them in the right direction that is already something they want to do, and just making that as easy as possible, helping people feel successful when they make progress.
Awesome. Well, we are just at time, and I want to give a sincere thank you to each of you for sharing your expertise today. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I can tell from the chat box love that our audience members have also really appreciated your time. So I'm going to wrap now, and I'm just going to say we have another session coming up at 5 o'clock Eastern, 2 Pacific today on health equity through coordinated care. So join us for that and have a good rest of your day. Thank you all.